There she was, my own daughter, pointing at me while federal agents filled my living room, screaming that I was the one who had lost her mind. After the forged documents, after the stolen funds, after the psychiatrist who diagnosed dementia without ever meeting me, Vivian looked the officers in the eye and swore I was having a breakdown. I am 67 years old. I spent 40 years building hospitals, courthouses, structures that will stand for a century. My daughter spent 18 months trying to destroy everything I was, my sanity, my savings, my freedom. And when the trap finally closed around her, she still thought she could lie her way out. That night, I learned exactly what my child was capable of. To understand how we arrived at that terrible moment, I need to take you back to where it started. This story isn't easy to tell, but I'm grateful you're here to listen. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they weren't who you thought? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Some details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling purposes. The message and the lesson are what truly matter. My granddaughter tugged my sleeve while dirt still clung under my fingernails and asked why her daddy was measuring my garden with a stranger in a suit. I had been kneeling in the gardenia beds I planted 30 years ago with my late husband Richard, my silver hair pinned back against the October breeze. At 67, my knees protested the position, but these plants had survived hurricanes and droughts, and I had promised Richard I would tend them until I could not. Lily Crane, 9 years old with her grandmother's sharp eyes, pointed toward the back lawn. "Grandma, why is Daddy measuring your garden with that man?" I followed her gaze through the living room window. My son-in-law, Preston Crane, 46, adjusted his custom-tailored jacket and checked his phone without looking up. He moved through my property like he was taking inventory, photographing every angle, while a man in an expensive suit tapped notes into a tablet. I recognized the software on that screen. Real estate appraisal software I had seen countless times during 35 years as an architect. Maybe he's planning to add more flower beds for me. Sweetheart. I forced a calm smile, but my hands tightened on the garden trowel. But the man has a computer. Lily's brow furrowed. Daddy looked angry when he saw me watching. I had spent 35 years reading blueprints. I knew what it looked like when someone was measuring a building for demolition. "Let's go wash up for lunch, shall we?" I brushed the soil from my gardening gloves and took Lily's hand, guiding her inside while my eyes tracked Preston's systematic documentation of my home. The Georgian revival I had designed myself, the crown jewel of a career that spanned 4 decades and 3 architectural awards. The dining room smelled of fresh basil and something expensive, my daughter's signature pasta salad. Vivian Crane, 42, swept in wearing silk separates that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her smile perfectly calibrated to project concern. "There you are, Mom. I was worried you'd been out in that garden too long." She kissed my cheek, leaving a trace of perfume that probably cost more than my grocery bill. "I brought some paperwork we need to discuss. Just standard healthcare enrollment forms." She slid a stack of papers across the table, and I felt the weight of them before I touched a single page. Preston joined us, settling into the chair across from me with the comfortable authority of a man who believed he was already in control. "Just routine stuff," Preston added, not meeting my eyes. "Vivian's been handling it. You know how complicated Medicare gets." I did not reach for the papers immediately. Instead, I served Lily a portion of pasta salad and poured sweet tea into crystal glasses Richard's mother had given us for our wedding. Let them wait. Let them wonder if the old woman had noticed anything. The forms looked legitimate at first glance. Proper letterhead, Medicare language, the usual bureaucratic density. But I had not survived 40 years in architecture without learning to read fine print. Buried on page 7, in font size barely larger than the period at the end of this sentence, were the words, "full financial power of attorney." How long had my own daughter been planning this? Weeks, months, since before Richard died. "The pasta salad is delicious, dear." I turned to page 8, keeping my voice light. "You've improved the recipe." Vivian beamed. "I added pine nuts. I know how much you love this house." "Mom, that's why we want to make sure everything is protected. Property values in this neighborhood are incredible right now. $2.84 million. Can you believe it? My blood turned to ice water. $2.84 million. The exact number from the appraisal I had locked in my personal safe. That is quite specific. Vivian. I met my daughter's eyes and watched something flicker behind her practiced warmth. A calculation. A recalibration. Where did you get that number? Oh, you know, Zillow, neighborhood comparisons. Her laugh came half a second too late. Everyone's always checking these days. Let me read this tonight, dear. I set down my fork and smiled the same smile I had used on difficult contractors for 3 decades. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and I want to make sure I understand everything before I sign. The table went quiet. Lily looked between her parents and me, sensing something she could not name. Preston's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Vivian's smile held, but her eyes had gone flat as river stones. Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need. I complimented her pasta salad once more, while my architect's mind calculated angles and timelines. Someone had been inside my safe. Someone had hired an appraiser without my knowledge. And now I had exactly 18 hours to find out what else they had done before they came back for my signature. I watched Vivian help Lily into her jacket. And I thought about the little girl I had raised, the one who used to bring me hand-drawn blueprints of imaginary castles. That girl had grown into a woman measuring my life for liquidation. The front door closed, their car pulled away, and I finally let my hands shake. The house had gone quiet, Lily asleep in her old bedroom upstairs, and I finally spread the documents across Richard's desk beneath the amber glow of his reading lamp. My hands had stopped shaking sometime after dinner, replaced by something colder and more useful. Focus. I had made grilled cheese for Lily, read her a chapter of Charlotte's Web, and kissed her forehead while she drifted off. Now, in the study where my husband had graded student papers for 30 years, I began to dissect what my daughter had tried to slip past me. The main document was clever. Healthcare enrollment language dominated the first 6 pages. All legitimate forms I actually needed to complete. But Richard always said the same thing about contracts. Read the appendix first. That is where they hide the teeth. Page 12, Appendix C, a professional property appraisal, complete with photographs of my home taken from angles I did not recognize. The date at the top made my stomach turn. September 14th, 6 weeks ago. They had started this while I was still planting autumn bulbs. Still believing my daughter called on Sundays because she missed me. The appraiser's signature belonged to a firm I recognized, Hartsfield Commercial Valuations. Preston's company had used them for 3 projects I knew of. This was not impulse. This was not opportunistic greed spotting a vulnerable widow. This was architecture. I had designed hospitals that held life and death in their walls. I knew what premeditation looked like in a floor plan. Every measurement Preston took this morning, every photograph, every note the suited stranger tapped into his tablet, all of it was redundant. They already had what they needed. Today's performance was about something else entirely, perhaps establishing a pattern of behavior. Perhaps gathering footage of the confused old woman who did not notice strangers measuring her home. I turned to the power of attorney language and read it 3 times. Upon execution, my daughter would control every asset, every account, every decision. She could sell this house without my consent. She could liquidate Richard's pension. She could move me into a facility and claim it was for my own good. The phone rang at 9 o'clock, and I nearly knocked over my tea reaching for it. Lorraine? The voice on the other end carried a careful weight. It's Wallace. I need to tell you something. Wallace Thornton, 65, had been Richard's closest friend since their graduate school days. He had stood as best man at our wedding, delivered the eulogy at Richard's funeral, and checked on me every week since with quiet persistence. His voice now held an edge I had never heard before. What is it, Wallace? Last Tuesday, I received a phone call. He paused, and I heard him take a breath. Someone claiming to be a concerned family member. They asked questions about you. Whether you had been confused lately, whether you forgot appointments or got lost driving, whether you had shown any concerning behaviors. The study suddenly felt very cold. What did you tell them? I told them I had known you for 40 years, and you are sharper than anyone half your age. Then I hung up. Another pause. But Lorraine, the questions were specific, leading, like they were building a file. Let me tell you something about architects. We are trained to see what is not yet built, and I could see exactly what my daughter was constructing. A case for psychiatric incompetency. The property appraisal was not the foundation. It was just one beam in a larger structure. The power of attorney was the framework. And these phone calls, checking with friends, perhaps neighbors, perhaps my doctor's office, they were gathering the evidence to make it all legal. Did they say who they were, I asked, though I already knew the answer. They said they were family, declined to give a name. The number came up blocked. Wallace's voice hardened. I do not like this, Lorraine. I do not like it at all. Neither do I. We talked for another 10 minutes. He offered to come over, to help, to do anything. I thanked him and said I needed to think. What I did not say was that thinking was exactly what they did not want me to have time for. That was why the documents arrived with lunch. With pressure. With Lily's innocent presence to soften my defenses. I hung up the phone and stepped onto the back porch, letting the October night settle around me. Cicadas sang in the garden Richard and I had planted together. A freight train rumbled somewhere distant. Heading toward the coast, upstairs. My granddaughter slept peacefully in the room where her mother once dreamed innocent dreams. I would not let that child wake to a world where her grandmother had been erased. They were not just after my money or my house. They were building a cage, a legal prison where I would have no voice, no rights, no recourse. They wanted to declare me incompetent, strip away my autonomy, and help themselves to everything I had spent a lifetime building. And somewhere in this house, there had to be evidence of how far they had already gone. Preston used the guest room as an office when he visited. I had noticed the new lock on that door last month, but thought nothing of it. I would not make that mistake again. The lock on the guest office door was new, cheap brass hardware screwed into 100-year-old oak, installed sometime in the past month without my knowledge or permission. I stood in the darkened hallway at 11 o'clock, Wallace's warning still echoing in my mind. They were building a case. They were laying foundations. And Preston had chosen my own home as his construction site. My purse yielded an expired credit card and a hairpin from the bathroom drawer. 35 years on construction sites had taught me that every lock has a weakness. Cheap consumer hardware like this, the kind you pick up at a big box store for $12, was designed to create the illusion of security, nothing more. The mechanism surrendered in under a minute. The door swung inward, and I caught the smell of fresh printer ink. Preston always underestimated me. He saw a retired widow who planted flowers and hosted Sunday lunches. He did not see the woman who had supervised construction crews, negotiated contracts, and read through legal documents thicker than phone books. He certainly did not see the woman standing in his doorway now, ready to dismantle whatever he had built in the shadows. A lock is just a promise. And my son-in-law had been breaking promises since the day he said, "I do." The room had been transformed. When this was simply a guest bedroom, it held a daybed, a reading chair, an antique wardrobe that had belonged to Richard's mother. Now a modern desk dominated the space, flanked by a filing cabinet and a printer still warm to the touch. Papers lay stacked in organized piles. A laptop sat closed in the corner, its power light pulsing green in the darkness. I went for the filing cabinet first. Locked, of course. But the key sat in a small dish on the desk. More arrogance. The top drawer held tax documents, most of them mine. The second drawer held insurance policies. But the third drawer, when I pulled it open, made my heart stop. A withdrawal form from my retirement account, $520,000, authorized 3 weeks ago. My name on the signature line, my social security number in the appropriate boxes, but the handwriting I had spent decades signing blueprints and contracts. I knew my own signature the way I knew my own heartbeat. This was not it. Close, practiced, but the loop on the L was too tight and the flourish on the final D was mechanical rather than natural. Someone had studied my signature and reproduced it with care. Someone had walked into a financial institution with forged documents and walked out with $500,000 of my retirement. $520,000. My retirement. The number stared back at me like a death certificate. I kept digging. Behind the withdrawal form, I found sale documents for my 2 rental properties, the duplexes Richard and I had purchased in 1995, our hedge against uncertain times. Both had been transferred to something called Magnolia Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware. The sale prices were absurdly low. The signatures, again, were forgeries. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear, from something colder, something with teeth. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, the one I checked every Sunday morning out of habit. The retirement account showed a balance of $47. The checking account held $212. The savings account Richard and I had built over 40 years of careful planning was gone, drained to a number that would not cover my grocery bill. $950,000. 40 years of work. Everything Richard and I had saved, invested, and protected. Gone. I sat down heavily in Preston's chair, surrounded by the evidence of my own financial murder. The papers fanned out across the desk like an autopsy report. Every document bore the mark of careful planning, dates staggered to avoid detection, amounts just below reporting thresholds, signatures practiced until they could fool a casual observer. How do you mourn money? You do not. You trace it, you follow it, and then you take it back. Upstairs, Lily slept in her old bedroom, dreaming whatever innocent dreams 9-year-olds dream. Down the hall, the room where Vivian had grown up sat empty, waiting for the daughter who had become a stranger. And here I sat, in the office where my son-in-law had orchestrated the theft of everything I had worked for. I gathered the documents into a neat pile, evidence that would need to be photographed, copied, and secured before anyone knew I had found it. But as I set the papers down, my eyes fell on the laptop in the corner of the desk. The power light pulsed green, steady as a heartbeat. The screen was dark, but the machine was still running, still connected, still holding whatever secrets Preston thought he had hidden behind a $12 lock. The theft was devastating. But thieves, I knew, rarely stopped at money. If they had gone this far, forged signatures, liquidated assets, built a psychiatric case, there had to be something more. Something they still needed. Something that required me to be legally silenced before Monday. I reached for the trackpad. The laptop woke at my touch, and the first document on the screen was a court filing that turned theft into something far worse. Emergency guardianship petition. Petitioner, Vivian Crane. Respondent, me. I read it twice, then closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen. Some calls require steady hands, and the number I was about to dial belonged to a man who had waited 27 years to repay a debt. The Earl Grey steeped while I found the business card I had kept in my address book since 1998. Douglas Mercer, Federal Litigation. The card was yellowed now, the edges soft from years of waiting. He answered on the second ring despite the hour. Douglas Mercer, 58, had built a career on cases that other lawyers called impossible. His voice carried the sharp precision of a federal litigator who never truly slept. Douglas, it's Lorraine Ashford. I need the favor you promised me in 1998. A pause. Then, tell me everything. I laid it out in 4 minutes flat. The secret appraisal. The power of attorney buried in healthcare forms. The forged signatures. The drained accounts. The guardianship petition waiting on Preston's laptop like a loaded weapon. Let me tell you about debts. In 1998, I redesigned Douglas Mercer's Family Foundation when every other structural engineer said, demolish. The building had been his father's legacy, crumbling from decades of neglect. I found the load-bearing walls that could be saved. I found the foundation that still held true. He swore he would remember. He did. Give me 20 minutes, Douglas said. I need to trace that LLC. I drank my tea and waited. The kitchen clock ticked toward 2 in the morning. Outside, the October darkness pressed against the windows like something patient. The phone rang at 1:47. The LLC is registered to a subsidiary of your son-in-law's holding company. Douglas's voice had gone flat, the voice he used in court when presenting evidence. Lorraine, Preston Crane is being sued by 4 investor groups. His fund is facing federal investigation for fraud. How much? $3.2 million in investor losses. The lawsuits allege a 5-year Ponzi scheme. He's been paying early investors with new investor money. And the whole thing is collapsing. Douglas paused. The money he took from you, the retirement, the properties, it's settlement money. He needs it to stay out of federal prison. I set down my teacup carefully. Nearly $1 million, stolen from me to cover someone else's crimes. My son-in-law had not just betrayed me, he had turned my life savings into a get-out-of-jail payment. And the guardianship petition, filled 3 days ago, emergency hearing scheduled for Monday morning, 9 a.m. I heard him typing. I'm sending you the full filing now, Lorraine. You need to read the psychiatric evaluations they attached. Monday, 9 in the morning. 40 hours from now, a judge would decide if I was still a person. I returned to the guest office and opened my email on Preston's laptop. The attachment loaded slowly. Page after page of legal language designed to strip me of every right I had spent 67 years earning. Petitioner seeks emergency guardianship based on documented cognitive decline and risk of harm. The psychiatric evaluations were thorough, detailed, and completely fabricated. I read descriptions of violent episodes I had never had, paranoid delusions about family members I had never expressed, a progressive dementia diagnosis from a psychiatrist whose name I did not recognize and whose office I had never visited, violent outbursts requiring restraint. I had never raised my hand to anyone in my life. Confusion regarding time and place. I could name every president since Eisenhower in order. Danger to herself and others. I was the one in danger. They had built a cage of paper and lies. But paper burns. And lies have foundations too, foundations that can be excavated. I scrolled to the appendix, looking for the timeline of their observations. The supporting documentation stretched back months, incident reports, concerned family statements, clinical notes, all fiction, all designed to paint a portrait of a woman who did not exist. Then I found the first psychiatric note. The date stopped my breath. 10 months ago. I did the math twice to be certain. 10 months ago. Richard was still alive. He had been in the hospital, fighting the cancer that would take him 6 weeks later. I had been at his bedside every day, holding his hand, reading to him, promising him the garden would bloom again in spring. And my daughter had been planning this, while I sat in that hospital room watching my husband die. Vivian had been laying the groundwork to have me declared incompetent, while I held Richard's hand as he took his last breath. She had been meeting with psychiatrists to build a case against my sanity. The betrayal I had discovered tonight was not a sudden decision. It was not even a cold calculation made after her father's death. It was a long, patient construction that began while Richard was still breathing. I closed my eyes and let the truth settle into my bones. My daughter had looked at her dying father and seen an opportunity. I remembered Vivian sitting beside her father's hospital bed, holding his hand, telling him she loved him, and now I understood what she had really been calculating behind those tears. The timeline assembled itself in my mind with architectural precision. 10 months ago, Richard's diagnosis, the cancer that would take him in 6 weeks. 9 months ago, Vivian's first visit to a psychiatrist she never mentioned, the one whose name appeared on evaluations I had never consented to. 8 months ago, Richard's funeral, where my daughter wept on my shoulder while the legal framework to steal my freedom was already under construction. Every hospital visit had been reconnaissance. Every concerned daughter act had been data collection. She had held his hand while he struggled to breathe, kissed his forehead while his eyes dimmed, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she had been surveying what she would inherit. When does a daughter stop being your child? Is it a moment or a slow erosion you refuse to see until the foundation is already gone? I pushed back from Preston's desk and walked through the darkened house. The grandfather clock in the foyer read 3:15. In less than 40 hours, a judge would look at fabricated psychiatric evaluations and decide whether I deserved to keep my own name. The hallway photographs watched me pass decades of family history arranged chronologically along the wall. Vivian at 5, gap-toothed and grinning. Vivian at 16, sulking in her prom dress. Vivian at 23, radiant in her wedding gown, while Preston smiled beside her with the satisfied expression of a man who had just acquired something valuable. I had missed it, all of it. I had seen what I wanted to see, my daughter growing, thriving, building a life. I had not seen the calculations behind her eyes. I had not noticed when affection became performance. Richard's photograph hung at the end of the hall. Him at 71, in the garden he loved. Wearing the work boots he refused to throw away despite my complaints about the mud. His smile in that picture had always seemed knowing, as if he were amused by a joke only he understood. I stopped in front of it and touched the glass over his face. The frame was dusty. I had not cleaned it since he died, because cleaning it felt like admitting he was never coming back. "I think you knew," I said aloud. My voice sounded strange in the silent house, the first words I had spoken to him since the funeral. "I think you saw it in her eyes those last weeks. You tried to tell me something, didn't you? That day you squeezed my hand and looked toward the door after she left." The photograph did not answer, but I remembered his eyes that day troubled in a way that had nothing to do with his illness. "We built this house together, Richard. 40 years of planning and saving and measuring and dreaming. She wants to sell it out from under me while I rot in some facility." I pressed my palm flat against the glass. "And she started planning it while you were still fighting." The anger that rose in me was not hot. It was cold and precise, the kind of fury that builds structures instead of destroying them. "I'm going to protect what we made," I told him, "and I'm going to protect Lily, whatever it costs." Upstairs, my granddaughter slept peacefully, unaware that her grandmother had just declared war on her mother. Lily would not understand what was happening, not now, maybe not for years. But someday she would be old enough to know the truth, and when that day came, I would be there to tell her. Not Vivian, not Preston, me. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling every one of my 67 years in my knees and my back. The bedroom I had shared with Richard for 4 decades waited at the end of the hall. Empty now, except for the memories that lived in every corner. I did not sleep. I lay in the darkness and I planned. Architects learn to demolish before they learn to build. You cannot raise something new on a rotten foundation. You have to tear it down to the dirt, examine every weakness, understand exactly where the structure failed before you can begin again. My daughter had built a trap. Hidden surveillance that Wallace's call had hinted at. Forged documents that filled Preston's desk. Paid psychiatrists who had never met me, but were ready to testify that I could not remember my own name. She had constructed an elaborate case designed to erase me from my own life. But she had forgotten one thing. I spent 35 years building structures that could withstand hurricanes. I knew exactly where the load-bearing walls were. And I knew, with the certainty of an engineer reading a blueprint, that every structure has weak points. I turned off the bedside lamp and watched the dawn begin to lighten the curtains. Today, I would begin. Not defending, not explaining, not pleading my sanity to people who had already decided I was worthless. Dismantling. My daughter had declared war while her father was dying. She should have waited until I was dead too, because now I knew what she was, and I had nothing left to lose. The bacon had to sizzle at exactly the right volume. I stood at the stove at 7 in the morning, running on 3 hours of sleep and pure determination. The cast iron pan Richard had given me for our 10th anniversary heated evenly, the way it always did. 3 strips of bacon, arranged precisely. Coffee brewing in the pot he had bought the year before he died. Every Saturday for 35 years, I had made this breakfast. Every Saturday, the neighbors had seen my kitchen light come on at 6:45. Every Saturday, I had been unknowingly building an archive of my own competence. I photographed the finished plate with my phone, checking the timestamp before texting it to my friend Dorothy with the message about finally perfecting the hollandaise. The metadata would show a clear mind, a steady hand, A woman in full possession of her faculties at 7:12 on a Saturday morning. The hollandaise reminded me of Easter 1987. Vivian at 14, insisting she could make it herself. 3 ruined batches before success. "Mom, you have to let me fail first," she had said. I would let her fail now, but not at destroying me. After breakfast, I walked the garden perimeter under the pretense of checking the chrysanthemums. Hazel Pemberton, my 80-year-old neighbor, waved from her porch. The Hendersons discussed mulch with me for 10 minutes. I made myself visible, coherent, aggressively normal. Each interaction was a deposit in a bank I had not known I was building. I returned inside, wrote a detailed grocery list with the date in the header, and called the pharmacy to confirm a prescription pickup. The pharmacist and I discussed the weather for 2 minutes. A voice recording of a perfectly lucid conversation, timestamped and logged in their system. Vivian thought she had been building a case against me. She had forgotten that I had been building one for myself for 35 years. That evening, I waited. Preston and Vivian left at 9:30 for what they called their evening walk. I watched from the upstairs window until their figures disappeared around the corner, then moved quickly to the guest room, where Preston had established his office. The laptop sat open on the desk. Arrogance or trap? I could not tell. But a woman who had raised 2 children on a professor's salary had learned to work with what she had. The folder was labeled Mom Care Plan. Care. The clinical language made me a project, a problem, a thing to be managed. Inside were audio files spanning 3 months, recordings of conversations between my daughter and her husband about how to dismantle my life. I clicked the most recent file. Vivian's voice filled the room, calm and businesslike. The key is making her doubt her own memory. We move things, small things, nothing obvious. When she mentions it, we act confused. Once she starts questioning herself out loud, we have audio. Once she gets angry about it, that's aggression. Either way, we win. My jaw ached. I had been clenching it so hard I could feel my molars grinding. Richard used to do that wake up with jaw pain from stress grinding through the night. He never knew what to do with betrayal either. At least his had come from colleagues, not from the child we had made together. Preston's voice joined hers on the recording. "And Whitmore, he's ready." "Prepared," Vivian said. "I met with him twice. He knows what to look for. By Monday, we'll have a professional evaluation that supports everything we've documented." The psychiatrist scheduled to evaluate me had already been coached on what to find. The evaluation I had thought might save me was another trap. Constructed before I even knew I was being hunted, I photographed the laptop screen. I emailed the audio file to myself with hands that shook, not from fear, but from the effort of not screaming, of not walking downstairs and confronting my daughter with her own voice, asking her when she had stopped seeing me as human. I noticed my hands on the keyboard. Same hands that had rubbed Vicks on Vivian's chest during childhood fevers. Same hands that had sewn her prom dress when we could not afford the one she wanted. Same hands that had held hers through Richard's funeral while she sobbed against my shoulder. Those hands had created the woman who was planning to erase me. I restored the laptop to exactly how Preston had left it and walked to my bedroom on legs that felt borrowed. In my nightstand drawer, beneath expired coupons and Richard's last birthday card, lay my address book. Douglas had already traced the financial crimes. Now I needed him to understand the full scope. Because somewhere in that audio file, my daughter had mentioned cameras, plural. I needed to find them before Monday's evaluation. An evaluation I now knew had been rigged before it was ever scheduled. The clock read 11:47. In approximately 33 hours, a judge would decide my fate based on evidence manufactured by my own child and a psychiatrist who had been paid to find madness, where none existed. I set my alarm for 5:30 and lay down in the darkness. Tomorrow, I would hunt. Sleep was a luxury for women who had not just heard their daughters plotting their erasure. I lay in the darkness for less than an hour before the word cameras drove me out of bed. Plural. Not one device hidden somewhere obvious, but a network, a system. I pulled on my robe and found the flashlight Richard kept in the nightstand drawer. The house I had designed myself. The home where I had raised my children and buried my husband had become a surveillance site, and I intended to map every inch of it. I started in the living room, sweeping the flashlight beam across crown molding and ceiling fixtures with the systematic patience of an engineer examining blueprints. The smoke detector caught my attention first. Standard placement, standard housing. But the small lens glinting in my flashlight beam was not standard at all. I climbed onto a chair and examined it closely without touching. Professional installation. Discrete wiring running behind the mounting plate into the ceiling. This was not a cheap spy camera from the internet. Someone had been paid to install this. Someone had created a paper trail. The decorative book on the hallway shelf, a leather-bound volume neither Richard nor I had ever read, held a second camera in its spine. The kitchen wall clock, the one Vivian had given me for Christmas 3 years ago, concealed a third. 3 cameras, 3 angles. Every room I thought was private had been watched. I had lived in this house for 35 years. Tonight I learned I had been living in a fishbowl, and my daughter had been selling tickets. The wiring told the story. Thin cables, nearly invisible against the white paint. Running along corners and through small holes drilled into the walls. Preston's work, not Vivian's. She had never been able to follow a wiring diagram. I traced the cables through the hallway, down the back staircase, and into the basement. Richard's old filing boxes sat stacked against the far wall, exactly where they had been since his death. But behind them, in the corner, where the furnace pipes created a natural blind spot, stood a metal cabinet I had never seen before. The lock was cheap, a hairpin from my bathroom drawer and 30 seconds of patient pressure, and it surrendered with a soft click. Inside a small server humming quietly, 3 external hard drives, and a monitor showing 4 live feeds of my home in split-screen display. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway outside my bedroom, the dining room where I had served my daughter lunch while she slid power of attorney documents across the table. They had been watching me shower, dress, grieve, sleep. Every moment I thought I had to myself had been recorded and stored. Richard's filing cabinet sat 3 feet away, his tax records from 1987 still organized in alphabetical folders inside. He would never have let strangers wire cameras into our walls. Thank God he died before seeing what his daughter had become. I stood in front of the monitor and watched myself, or rather, watched the empty rooms where I should have been sleeping. The timestamp in the corner read 11:47 p.m. The footage archive went back 9 months. 9 months of surveillance. 9 months of my life, stolen frame by frame. But the footage was not just evidence of their crime, it was evidence of my competence. This morning, technically yesterday morning now, I had cooked breakfast with precise movements. I had photographed my meal and texted Dorothy. I had walked the garden, spoken coherently with neighbors, called the pharmacy, all of it captured in high definition by cameras meant to document my deterioration. They had installed a surveillance system to prove I was losing my mind. Instead, they had created an unimpeachable record of a woman in full possession of her faculties. I found a portable drive in the cabinet's supply drawer and connected it to the server. The download progress bar crept forward while I stood guard in the basement darkness, listening for footsteps overhead. The house remained silent. Preston and Vivian were still out or already asleep, confident that their surveillance network was secure. The drive clicked. Download complete. 9 months of footage. 9 months of evidence. Recovered. I pocketed the drive and climbed the basement stairs, leaving their system running exactly as I had found it. Let them watch an empty bed. Let them review footage of their target sleeping peacefully while their trap transformed into her weapon. The grandfather clock in the foyer read 12:15 in less than 6 hours. I would call Douglas with everything I had gathered, the forged documents, the audio recordings, and now 9 months of video proving that the woman they claimed could not remember her own name had been functioning perfectly the entire time. I walked to my bedroom and lay down on top of the covers, still in my robe. The cameras could watch. I had nothing to hide. My daughter had forgotten something fundamental about her mother. I had spent 35 years building structures designed to withstand hurricanes. I knew how to find weak points, and I knew how to exploit them. By Monday, Vivian would learn what happened when an architect decided to demolish. The envelope from my electric bill became a weapon at 11:47 p.m. I sat at my bedroom desk, the encrypted drive safely hidden in the toe of an old boot in my closet, and spread the envelope flat under my reading lamp. On the back, I began to sketch. The floor plan of my own home emerged from memory with the precision of 40 years of architectural training. Living room camera, northwest corner. Smoke detector housing. Kitchen camera, south wall. Decorative clock. Hallway camera, east side. Fake book spine. I drew the approximate viewing angles based on the lens sizes I had observed cheap wide-angle lenses with poor peripheral coverage. Focal length determines field of view. They had bought cheap, and cheap meant gaps. I calculated the blind spots with a drafting pencil and a protractor I had kept since graduate school. 4 zones emerged where the cameras could not see the back garden corner behind the hydrangeas. The basement stairwell, the guest bathroom, and the laundry alcove off the kitchen. 4 places where I could still be myself. 4 places where I could plan without being recorded. Richard always said I could draft a building blindfolded. He never imagined I would use that skill to escape a prison built inside my own home. I memorized the map, then burned the envelope in the bathroom sink and washed the ashes down the drain. The cameras would see a woman who went to bed at a reasonable hour and slept peacefully. They would not see the woman who lay awake until dawn, rehearsing her performance. Sunday morning arrived with pale autumn light through the curtains. I moved through my routine with deliberate normalcy, aware of exactly which angles captured me. Breakfast in the kitchen, facing the camera while I cooked. A phone call to Dorothy discussing nothing important, my voice clear and steady. A grocery list written with dated header left prominently on the counter. At 8 o'clock, I announced to the empty house to the cameras that I was going to do some garden work. Beautiful morning for the hydrangeas. They won't prune themselves. I collected my gardening gloves and walked outside, crossing the lawn toward the back corner where the surveillance could not follow. The hydrangeas had grown thick over the years, creating a natural alcove against the fence. I knelt behind them, pulled out my phone, and called Wallace. Stepping into sunlight felt different now. Every inch of this property had been mapped, measured, claimed. By me, not them. Wallace answered on the second ring. "Lorraine, I need to see you today," I said quietly, keeping my voice below the level it might carry. "Not at the house." No hesitation, no questions about why. The botanical garden, our old bench. 2 o'clock, I'll be there. The ease of his response should have comforted me. Instead, it raised a question I had not considered. How long had Wallace been waiting by his phone, hoping I would finally ask for help? I was about to end the call when his voice changed lowered, urgent. "Lorraine, thank God you called. I've been watching your daughter's car in your driveway every weekend and praying you'd reach out." "What do you mean?" "There's something I need to tell you about Preston." He paused. "About what he's been doing at his firm. The lawsuits aren't public yet, but I have a friend in the Attorney General's office. Lorraine, your son-in-law is—" Footsteps crunched on gravel behind me. I lowered the phone immediately, slipping it into my gardening apron. The hydrangea leaves rustled as I turned, my hands already reaching for the pruning shears I had brought as cover. Vivian stood at the edge of the garden, watching me with the careful expression she had perfected over the past year. "Mom, who were you talking to?" "Dorothy." The lie came easily, too easily. She wanted the recipe for my lemon squares. I told her I would write it down after I finished with these hydrangeas. Vivian's eyes moved from my face to the phone-shaped bulge in my apron. I could see her calculating, weighing whether to push further. "You should come inside," she said finally. "Preston made coffee. We thought we could have a nice family breakfast." "In a moment, dear. These deadheads won't trim themselves." She stood there a beat longer than necessary, then turned and walked back toward the house. I watched her until she disappeared inside, counting my heartbeats until they slowed to something manageable. Wallace's voice came faintly from the phone, still pressed against my apron. "Lorraine, are you there?" I lifted it to my ear, speaking barely above a whisper. 2 o'clock, the botanical garden. "Don't call this number again. They may be monitoring it." Understood. Lorraine, be careful. I ended the call and stood slowly, my knees protesting the position. The hydrangeas needed actual trimming now. To make my cover story true, I worked for 20 minutes, letting the repetitive motion calm the adrenaline still coursing through me. Wallace knew something about Preston. Something important enough that he had been watching my house, waiting for a sign that I needed help. Whatever it was, I would learn it in 6 hours. Until then, I had a performance to maintain. The footsteps belonged to a raccoon. Fat, indifferent, waddling toward the compost bin like he owned the property. I exhaled slowly, my heart still racing from Vivian's interruption. Wallace had called back within minutes of her going inside, and we agreed he would come to the house instead. Safer than me trying to leave unnoticed. The back gate, the garden blind spot. First light. He arrived at 8 o'clock, slipping through the fence with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent 4 years learning my property's rhythms. We huddled behind the hydrangeas while the morning dew soaked through my garden shoes. Preston approached me 6 months ago, Wallace said, his voice barely above a whisper. He wanted to buy your share of a partnership investment. Said you were having memory problems and needed cash for medical care. I stared at him. What partnership? The 1995 real estate syndicate. The one Richard set up with 3 other faculty members. Your share is worth about $280,000 now. I had never told Vivian about that partnership. Richard had handled it, and after his death, I had simply let the quarterly checks deposit automatically. It was not listed on any documents my daughter should have seen. She found Richard's files, I said. They've been researching you for at least a year. Wallace's weathered face looked older in the dawn light. This isn't impulse, Lorraine. It's archaeology. They've been digging through every asset you own. Wallace's hand found mine on the garden bench. 67 years old. Hiding in my own backyard. Holding hands with a man I had kept at arm's length for 4 years. Vivian had stolen so much. She would not steal this too. I need to make a call, I said. Stay with me, in case she comes back out. I dialed Douglas while Wallace kept watch toward the house. The phone rang twice before that familiar, gravelly voice answered. Tell me you have something, Douglas said. I have surveillance footage proving my competence for 9 months. I have audio recordings of Vivian discussing how to gaslight me into appearing confused. I have forged signatures on financial documents. I paused. And I have a plan they don't know about. What kind of plan? I had built a firewall in 2022 because I knew my daughter. Mothers always know. We just pray we are wrong. I revoked every power of attorney document 3 years ago, filed the revocations in Chatham County before Richard died. Every POA Vivian thought she had was void before she ever tried to use it. Silence on the line. I also transferred the rental properties into an irrevocable trust. I continued. Lily is the beneficiary. The transfers Vivian arranged, they used authority that did not exist. Every transaction is void from the start. Douglas's stunned silence stretched so long, I checked to make sure the call was still connected. Ab initio, he finally said. The sales are void ab initio. They never legally occurred. His voice shifted, no longer the careful attorney, but something approaching wonder. Lorraine, you anticipated this. 3 years ago, you saw it coming and you built defenses. I hoped I was being paranoid. You weren't. I heard him typing rapidly. The rental properties, the POA revocations. Do you have the original filings? In a safety deposit box, First National on Bull Street. The branch manager has known me for 30 years. 3 years of planning, 18 months of execution. And Vivian's entire scheme collapsed into legal dust with 6 words. The revocations were filed first. Douglas's voice came back, measured now but carrying a new weight. Lorraine, you don't just have a defense. You have grounds for criminal charges, elder abuse, fraud, theft by deception. They used forged documents to liquidate assets. They installed surveillance without consent. They falsified psychiatric evaluations. Then file the charges. There's a complication. He paused, and I heard the hesitation that only comes when an attorney has to deliver bad news. The irrevocable trust. It names Lily as beneficiary. Yes, Vivian will claim you were incompetent when you created it, that the trust itself is invalid because you lacked capacity 3 years ago. His voice dropped. She'll use the same psychiatric playbook, just shifted backward in time. And if she succeeds in voiding the trust, everything reverts to your estate, which she'll control as guardian. The morning sun broke through the clouds, warming my face, while Douglas's words chilled my blood. So the protection I built for Lily becomes the weapon she uses against me. Only if she can prove incompetency in 2022. Can she? I thought about that year, Richard's final months, the endless hospital visits, the paperwork, the funeral arrangements. I had been exhausted, grieving, running on coffee and determination. But I had also been sharp enough to see what was coming and prepare for it. No, I said, she cannot. Because in 2022, I was still teaching continuing education courses at SCAD. I have classroom rosters, student evaluations, and a dean who will testify that I delivered coherent lectures on structural engineering to graduate students. Wallace squeezed my hand. Douglas began typing again. Then we have work to do, Douglas said, and we have 24 hours to do it. Vernon Crane looked like a man attending his own son's funeral, and in a way, he was. Douglas had suggested bringing Preston's parents into the alliance, and I had called them within the hour. Now they stood at my back gate, faces pale with the dread of people who had suspected something terrible and prayed they were wrong. Vernon Crane, 68, had spent his career as an insurance adjuster, trained to assess damage before it became catastrophic. His wife, Constance, 65, had been a church secretary for 3 decades, a woman whose faith in family had blinded her to what that family had become. Between them stood Lily, still in her Sunday dress, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I guided them through the garden to the blind spot behind the hydrangeas, then into the kitchen through the back door. The cameras would see nothing. I need to show you something, I said, and I need you to understand that what your son has done cannot be undone with apologies. I played the audio recording. Vivian's voice filled my kitchen, clinical and cold, explaining exactly how they planned to gaslight me into appearing incompetent. I watched Vernon's face drain of color. Constance pressed a hand to her mouth. Then I showed them the bank statement. The $50,000 deposit into their joint account 6 months ago, labeled consulting services. That money, Constance whispered. Preston said it was for watching Lily during your medical appointments. There were no medical appointments. I kept my voice level, though my hands wanted to shake. There is no confusion. There is only your son stealing from his wife's mother while paying you to look the other way. $50,000, the price of their silence, their willful blindness, their complicity. They had not known what they were being paid for, but they had cashed the checks anyway. Vernon sat heavily in one of my kitchen chairs. We thought he was helping you manage your finances. He said you were forgetting things, getting confused about bills. I designed this house, I said. I taught structural engineering at SCAD until 3 years ago. I managed Richard's estate through probate without a single error. I leaned forward. Your son told you I was losing my mind because he needed you to believe it, because belief makes complicity feel like compassion. Constance began to cry, quiet, shaking sobs that she tried to muffle with her hand. I had known this woman for 20 years. I had hosted her at holiday dinners, celebrated birthdays with her, held her hand at Richard's funeral. And she had accepted money to help steal my freedom. Constance wept like her tears could wash away the stain. They could not. But at least she was finally trying. What do you need from us? Vernon asked, his voice rough. Take Lily. Keep her safe until this is over. Do not tell Preston where she is. Do not answer his calls. I met his eyes. And when the time comes, tell the truth. To the court, to the police, to whoever asks. Tell them what your son paid you for. He nodded slowly. Constance wiped her face and reached for Lily's hand. Lily had been watching everything with those sharp eyes she had inherited from her grandfather, Richard's eyes. She understood more than any 9-year-old should. Grammy. She pulled away from Constance and wrapped her arms around my waist. Is Daddy in trouble? I knelt down to her level, ignoring the protest from my knees. Daddy made some bad choices, sweetheart. Grown-up choices that Grammy needs to fix. He yells at Mommy about your house. Her voice dropped to a whisper, as if sharing a secret. "He says it should be theirs already. Mommy cries sometimes after." The words hit me like ice water. Preston was not just stealing from me. He was pressuring Vivian, driving her deeper into the scheme. My daughter had become both perpetrator and victim, trapped by a husband who saw my home as his escape hatch. I kissed Lily's forehead. "Some things take time, sweetheart, but Grammy's going to fix it." "Promise you'll come to my birthday." "I promise." I walked them to Vernon's car, parked 2 streets over, where the surveillance could not see. Constance buckled Lily into the back seat, while Vernon gripped my hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "We should have seen it." "You see it now. That's what matters." The car pulled away. I watched Lily's face in the back window, her small hand pressed against the glass, until they turned the corner and disappeared. I watched until the car turned the corner. Whatever happened next, she would be safe. That was the only victory that mattered. I walked back to my house, the house I had designed, the house my husband and I had filled with 40 years of memories, the house my daughter was trying to steal. The kitchen still smelled of the coffee I had made for Vernon and Constance. The surveillance cameras still pulsed their quiet green lights. The house fell silent in a way it had not since Richard's death. No Lily laughing, no Vivian performing concern, no Preston's calculated footsteps overhead. Just me, alone in the home they wanted to steal, waiting for my daughter to return from church and find her trap sprung. The cameras were still running. Good. Let them record what comes next. 2 cups of Earl Grey, one for the living, one for the man who would have burned this house down before letting anyone steal it from me. The silence after Lily's departure had lasted barely an hour before Wallace returned through the back gate. He had insisted on being here when Vivian arrived, and I had not argued. Some battles require witnesses. I poured the tea carefully, placing 1 cup before Richard's photograph on the mantel. The steam rose toward his face, that half-smile he always wore when he knew something I did not. "She started planning this while you were on hospice," I said to the photograph. "While I was holding your hand in that hospital bed, counting your breaths, she was researching power of attorney documents." Wallace sat in the corner chair, silent. He understood that this moment was not for him. "The psychiatric evaluations began before you died. She was building a case for my incompetency while we were still praying for a miracle with yours." I lifted my teacup, watching the amber liquid catch the afternoon light. Our daughter looked at her dying father and saw an opportunity. I had not cried yet, not once since Friday night when the documents first crossed my dining room table. The tears were there, locked behind a dam I could not afford to break. When this was over, if I survived it, I would let myself drown in them. "But you taught me, didn't you?" I continued. "Document everything. Trust, but verify. Prepare for betrayal, even from those you love." I touched the glass over his face. "I thought you were being paranoid when you made me promise. I understand now." Richard's photograph watched me from the mantel, that expression frozen in time. He had known, I realized. He had seen something in Vivian during those final weeks, some calculation behind her bedside vigil. He had tried to warn me. I had not listened. Wallace spoke softly from his corner. "He would be proud of you, Lorraine. The way you have handled this, he would be so proud. He would be heartbroken first." I set down my teacup. "Proud later, heartbroken first." Yes, Wallace's voice carried something deeper than agreement. So am I. I looked at him then, really looked at him, for the first time since Richard's funeral. This man had loved me silently for 4 years. He had called to warn me about the psychiatric inquiries. He had slipped through my back gate at dawn to share intelligence. He had sat in my corner through this painful ritual without asking for anything in return. Richard would have approved. That thought surprised me, but it felt true. "I need to get something," I said. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom, to the closet I had not opened since the funeral. Richard's clothes still hung exactly where he had left them, shirts arranged by color, ties on the door rack, shoes lined beneath. The lavender sachets I had placed there kept the mothball smell at bay. His flannel shirt hung at the end, navy blue with faded gray stripes, worn soft from 30 years of grading papers at his desk. He always said it made him feel invincible during finals week, when the stack of essays seemed endless and the coffee pot ran dry. I slipped it on over my blouse. The fabric still smelled faintly of hymn pipe tobacco, library books, something that was simply Richard. Wallace appeared in the doorway. "You do not need the shirt for what comes next." "I know." I buttoned it slowly. "But I want him with me." He nodded, understanding in a way that required no explanation. We descended together, Wallace to the living room, me to the kitchen to wait. The evidence folders sat stacked on the counter, ready. The surveillance footage, the audio recordings, the forged signatures, the bank statements, everything organized, everything documented, everything Richard had taught me to preserve. "I am going to save your granddaughter's inheritance," I said to the empty air. "And then I am going to make our daughter face what she has become." The front door opened. Keys dropped in the ceramic bowl Vivian had given me for Mother's Day 2019, back when gifts still meant something, before they became props in an elaborate performance of filial devotion. Preston's heavy footsteps crossed the foyer, then Vivian's heels on hardwood. That precise click, click, click I had heard 1,000 times. "Mom!" Vivian's voice carried up from the entryway. "Whose car is in the driveway?" I looked at Wallace, standing quietly by the mantel. I looked at Richard's photograph, still holding its teacup tribute. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, an old woman in her dead husband's flannel, holding evidence that would destroy her only living child. The woman in the mirror did not look destroyed, she looked ready. Preston's footsteps moved toward the kitchen. "The kid's not here." "Car seat's gone from my parents' car. They must have taken her somewhere." Vivian's heels stopped. I could hear her processing the implications. Lily missing. Wallace's car in the driveway. The unusual silence of a house that should have contained a grandmother and granddaughter. "Mom!" Her voice climbed an octave. "Mom, where is Lily?" I walked toward the stairs. Vivian had screamed for 20 minutes before Preston dragged her to the car, threatening lawsuits that would never survive what I now held in my hands. The confrontation had been exactly as ugly as I expected. Vivian demanding Lily back, Preston threatening to call the police, both of them cycling through denial and rage when I calmly explained that their own surveillance system had recorded everything. They left in a storm of slammed doors and screeching tires, promising legal consequences that we both knew had already turned against them. Douglas arrived through the garage an hour later, using the spare key I had given him years ago. He spread documents across the dining room table like a general deploying forces. "The account freeze went through this morning," he said. $400,000 in their joint account at First National, frozen until the fraud investigation completes. They cannot access any of it, not a penny. Douglas aligned another document. And when they try, the bank flags it as evidence of intent. Every declined transaction becomes proof they knew about the frozen funds and attempted to circumvent. The total kept growing in my mind. The retirement account they had drained, the rental properties they had sold. Now this hidden account Preston had mentioned in the audio recordings. Nearly $1 million they had stolen or attempted to steal. The number sat in my chest like a stone. "The POA revocations are ironclad," Douglas continued. "Filed, recorded, time-stamped 3 years before any of their transactions. Every sale, every withdrawal, every forged signature, legally void from the moment ink touched paper." Wallace brought coffee from the kitchen. He had been here through all of it. The screaming confrontation, the tense silence after, the careful assembly of evidence. I caught his eye and nodded thanks. A voice called from the back garden. "Lorraine! Lorraine Ashford!" I walked to the fence line, where Hazel Pemberton stood holding her phone like a weapon. Hazel, 80 years old, retired school teacher, had watched over this neighborhood since before Richard and I moved in. She had sharp eyes, a sharper memory, and apparently a habit I had never noticed. "I photograph everything suspicious since the Henderson break-in 3 years ago," she said without preamble. "License plates, delivery trucks, anyone I don't recognize." She turned her phone toward me. The screen showed a photograph dated last Tuesday, Preston walking 2 men in suits toward my front door. One of them carried a medical bag. "That doctor fellow," Hazel said. "I remember him because he came twice. Both times you were out at the grocery store Tuesday. At your gardening class Thursday." My blood went cold. He never came inside when I was home. Never once. She swiped to another photograph. This one shows him leaving Tuesday, 43 minutes inside your house, Lorraine, with your son-in-law, while you were buying produce at the Kroger. How many times had I waved to Hazel over that fence, never imagining she was documenting my salvation in her phone's camera roll. You have timestamps. Timestamps, faces, license plates. She pulled herself straighter, a schoolteacher's pride in her voice. 80 years old, and my phone camera works just fine. I watched that man walk through your house taking notes. He never spoke to you, did he? No, I said. He never did. The psychiatrist who had signed evaluations claiming I suffered from progressive dementia, who had documented violent outbursts and confusion, who had recommended immediate guardianship, he had never examined me. He had toured my house with Preston, taken notes on my belongings, and fabricated an entire medical history while I was buying groceries. Can you send those photographs to my attorney? Already sending them. Hazel's thumbs moved across her screen with surprising speed. My grandson taught me the cloud backup. Everything's dated. Everything's saved. That doctor is going to wish he'd never set foot on this street. I thanked her inadequate words for what she had just given me and walked back inside. Douglas stood at the dining room table, his phone buzzing with incoming messages. Every piece of evidence was a brick, and Douglas was building a wall around my daughter that she would never climb over. The psychiatrist, I said. His name was on the guardianship petition. He signed evaluations claiming he examined me. And your neighbor just proved he never did. Douglas stared at Hazel's photographs on his phone, his attorney's mask slipping for the first time. Lorraine, this is not just civil fraud anymore. This is criminal conspiracy, forgery, elder abuse, potentially racketeering if the psychiatrist was paid for his false evaluations. He set down the phone and met my eyes. Your daughter could go to prison. The words hung in the afternoon air. Prison. My daughter. The baby I had held 42 years ago. The girl who had cried when her goldfish died. The woman who had become something I no longer recognized. Preston would certainly face charges. He was the architect of this scheme, the one with financial motive. But Vivian had signed documents. Vivian had coordinated with the psychiatrist. Vivian had visited my house, knowing cameras were recording evidence against me. If I pursued this to its end, I might have to testify against my own child. I looked at Richard's flannel shirt, still wrapped around my shoulders. What would he have done? 2 FBI agents in an unmarked sedan, 2 blocks east, waiting for a blank text message from a 67-year-old grandmother. I had made my decision in the hour after Douglas showed me Hazel's photographs. Richard would have protected his granddaughter. Richard would have ensured justice. And Richard would have given Vivian one final chance to choose differently, even knowing she would not take it. Douglas ended his call and set down his phone. Agent Caldwell leads the team, former Financial Crimes Unit. She has seen cases like this before, and she says the evidence package is exceptional. How many agents? 2 in the sedan, 2 more in an SUV on the parallel street. He paused. They enter on your signal, a blank text to this number. They will not knock. The phone sat in my palm like a grenade with the pin already pulled. 1 tap, 1 blank message. My daughter in handcuffs by nightfall. And if I do not send the text, Douglas met my eyes. Then this stays civil. We pursue the fraud charges, recover your assets, void the guardianship petition. Vivian faces financial ruin, but not prison. He spread his hands. Your choice, Lorraine. It has always been your choice. I looked at the phone. The screen glowed in the darkening room, a rectangle of possibility I had never imagined holding. Wallace came in from the kitchen, where he had been making coffee none of us would drink. The 3 of us settled into the living room as afternoon light faded through the curtains. Douglas sat near the window where he could watch the street. Wallace took the chair beside mine. We did not turn on the lights. The darkness felt appropriate, a vigil for something that was about to die. I watched the last light fade behind the magnolia tree Richard had planted for our 23rd anniversary. 23 years of shade, of autumn color, of spring blossoms we had watched from this window together. Now it would witness this. Wallace's hand found mine in the darkness, warm, steady, patient. I did not pull away. Somewhere in that small gesture, something shifted. Richard had been dead for 10 months. I had spent those months frozen, unable to imagine a future that did not include him. But here was Wallace, who had waited without demanding, who had helped without asking for anything, who sat beside me now as my world collapsed, and simply held my hand. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "you are not alone." "I know." I squeezed his fingers. "That is what makes this bearable." The minutes stretched into an hour. I closed my eyes and let the memories come. Vivian at 5 showing me a drawing of our house. Vivian at 12 asking to help me measure a client's property. Vivian at 23, radiant in white, dancing with her father at her wedding. That girl was gone. The woman who had replaced her was someone I did not recognize. Someone who had looked at her dying father and seen a financial opportunity. I had failed somewhere, missed something, built a daughter who could become this. Or maybe I had not built her at all. Maybe Preston had. Maybe the money had. Maybe something in Vivian had always been waiting to crack, and I had simply refused to see the fault lines. It did not matter now. What mattered was Lily. What mattered was protecting what remained. Douglas shifted at the window. Headlights. I opened my eyes. Through the curtains, twin beams swept across the front lawn as a car turned into the driveway. The engine cut. A door slammed. Then another. Vivian's voice carried through the evening air, sharp and furious. "What do you mean, frozen? Try it again. Try a different card." Preston's lower voice, indistinct but tense. "This is her. This is absolutely her doing." Vivian's heels clicked up the front walk. "That woman has lost her mind. And I am going to." The front door key scraped in the lock. I stood from my chair, Wallace's hand sliding away from mine. Douglas moved toward the hallway, positioning himself where he could see both the door and me. The phone was still in my hand. Screen dark. One tap away from ending everything. Headlights. The crunch of tires. They were here. And I still had not decided if I would send that text. The door swung open. Light from the porch spilled into the darkened foyer. I heard Vivian's sharp intake of breath as she saw figures waiting in the shadows. "Mom?" Her voice cracked on the word. "Mom, whose cars are outside? What is going on?" Preston appeared behind her, his face hard in the porch light. He saw Douglas and stopped cold. I stepped into the foyer, still wearing Richard's flannel, still holding the phone that could destroy my daughter's life. Vivian's eyes went to the phone, then to Douglas, then to Wallace emerging from the living room. She understood. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. The same calculation that had started this, now running in reverse. "We need to talk," I said. My finger hovered over the send button. The front door opened at exactly 7:15, and I didn't move from Richard's leather chair. I'd positioned myself deliberately facing the entryway, the lamp behind me casting my face in shadow while illuminating theirs. Douglas stood in the kitchen doorway, invisible from the foyer, but ready. Vivian's heels clicked against the marble. "Mom, why are all the lights off?" "We got your message about feeling dizzy," and she stopped when she saw me. Preston nearly collided with her back. "Hello, sweetheart." I kept my voice pleasant, controlled. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Please, sit down." My daughter's face cycled through emotions I'd cataloged over 67 years of studying human nature. Surprise, calculation, recovery. She smoothed her expression into maternal concern and crossed to the sofa, tugging Preston along. "You scared us!" Vivian perched on the edge of the cushion, leaning forward with practiced worry. "Dizziness at your age, we should call Dr. Matheson. Have you been taking your blood pressure medication? I've been saying for weeks that this house is too much for you to manage alone." The performance was flawless. I'd taught her well. Apparently, all those years of client presentations, of selling visions to skeptical investors, she'd absorbed the technique without the ethics. My blood pressure is perfect. I folded my hands in my lap. I had it checked yesterday, along with a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Preston's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Vivian didn't blink. "That's wonderful, Mom, but you have to understand our concern. Finding you wandering the garden at midnight, the forgotten appointments. I wasn't wandering. I was measuring the foundation settling on the East Terrace. And I didn't forget those appointments. I never scheduled them. I paused. Someone else did, using my name. The silence stretched between us like a held breath. I don't know what you're implying. Vivian's voice cooled by several degrees. We've only ever wanted to help you. This paranoia, it's exactly what we've been worried about. Is it paranoia when I have documentation? I reached beside the chair and lifted the manila folder Douglas had prepared. Appointment confirmation sent from an IP address traced to your home office. Browser history showing research into guardianship proceedings. A very interesting email chain between you and someone named Vernon Crane. Preston's face went gray. But Vivian, my daughter, met my eyes without flinching. You've been spying on us. I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. I opened the folder. Would you like to know what else I found? Or should we skip to the part where you explain why you booked a celebration dinner for 2 at Café Baloo scheduled for the day after the competency hearing you thought I didn't know about? Vivian stood abruptly, and for a moment I saw Richard in her, that same flash of temper when cornered. But Richard had always fought fair. This creature wearing my daughter's face had learned different rules. You're confused. Mother, you're seeing conspiracies where there's only concern. This is exactly why we need to have a conversation about your care. Sit down. Vivian, something in my tone stopped her. Perhaps she heard the woman who'd commanded construction crews, who'd negotiated with city councils and corporate boards. Perhaps she simply recognized that the power dynamic had shifted. She sat. Now here's where I need to pause this story, because what happens next shocked me to my core. And I think it might shock you too. Before I reveal what I discovered about my own daughter's betrayal, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever discovered someone you trusted completely was working against you? How did you find out? I read every single comment, and your stories help me feel less alone in this nightmare. Remember, while this account is inspired by real events, names and details have been changed to protect everyone involved. Now, back to that terrible night. I know about Boca Raton, I said quietly. The words landed like stones in still water. Preston made a small sound, almost a whimper, but Vivian's face remained marble smooth. Our anniversary trip, what about it? Room 847 at the Addison. The spa appointments you charged to a credit card I didn't know existed, one attached to an account at Meridian Trust bearing my name and your signature authority. I watched her carefully. The same account where $300,000 appeared last month? Transferred from my investment portfolio without my knowledge or consent. That's, Preston started, but Vivian's hand shot out to grip his arm. Whatever you think you know, Mother, you're wrong. Those accounts were set up for your protection. In case of medical emergency, someone needed access. In case of medical emergency. I repeated the phrase slowly, tasting its bitterness. Is that what you're calling this? A medical emergency? I stood, and the folder fell open, photographs scattering across the coffee table. Vivian and Preston at a restaurant that definitely wasn't in Boca Raton. Vivian meeting with a silver-haired man I now knew was Vernon Crane. Preston touring the Willowbrook Memory Care Facility, the one listed in their emails as Phase 2 housing. You've been planning this for months, I said, maybe longer, building a case, manufacturing evidence of decline, all while spending my money on hotels and spa treatments and, my voice cracked, on lawyers who specialize in stripping elderly parents of their rights. Movement from the kitchen doorway. Douglas stepped into the light, and I watched my daughter's composure finally crack. You remember Douglas Mercer, I said, your father's friend from law school. He's been helping me understand exactly how much trouble you're both in. Vivian's face had gone the color of old parchment. She looked from Douglas to me, then back again, calculations racing behind her eyes. Preston seemed to have stopped breathing entirely. But it was my daughter's whisper that cut deepest. Not angry, not defensive, but genuinely curious, as if the question mattered more than anything else. How long have you known? Douglas set the manila folder on the coffee table like a man laying flowers on a grave. He didn't answer Vivian's whispered question. That wasn't his role tonight. He was here for the evidence, and he presented it with the same methodical precision Richard had always admired in his oldest friend. Let's start with the power of attorney. Douglas withdrew the first document. Revoked October 2022. Your mother filed the paperwork herself, had it notarized, and recorded it with the county clerk. Every transaction you authorized after that date is void ab initio. That's Latin for from the beginning. Means it never legally happened. Preston's face went the color of old ash. But Vivian, my daughter, simply stared at the paper like she could will it out of existence. The property sale contracts you drafted for the lake house and the downtown parcels, void. Another document landed. The investment account transfers totaling $950,000, void and traceable. Another, the medical evaluations declaring your mother incompetent. Douglas paused, and something in his expression shifted from professional to personal. Those are where it gets criminal. Vivian. He withdrew a photograph, timestamp visible in the corner, showing a silver-haired man I'd never met entering my front door. Then another photograph, same man, same day, leaving 40 minutes later. Then a third me, that same morning, clearly visible through the window of Margaret Chen's cafe downtown, having breakfast with Douglas himself. The psychiatrist who signed these evaluations, stating he conducted in-home assessments of your mother's cognitive decline, Dr. Harold Whitmore never met her, not once. We have photographs proving he entered this house only when Mrs. Ashford was absent. Douglas's voice remained level, but I heard the contempt beneath it. He diagnosed dementia in a woman he'd never examined. That's not just malpractice, that's conspiracy to commit fraud. Each document Douglas placed on the table was another nail in a coffin my daughter had built for herself. I'd spent 40 years constructing buildings that would outlast me. She'd spent 18 months constructing a prison she'd now have to inhabit. I just handed him the hammer. Vivian's hands had begun to tremble. Those photographs could be doctored. The timestamps, metadata verified by 3 independent forensic analysts. Douglas cut her off without raising his voice. Would you like their affidavits? I have copies. Preston shifted on the sofa, his eyes darting toward the hallway, calculating distances, exits. I recognized that look. I'd seen it in contractors who knew they'd been caught cutting corners. There's more, Douglas continued. He withdrew a small digital recorder from his jacket pocket. This was recovered from your home office, hidden in the base of a lamp your mother gave you for your 30th birthday. Ironic. Really? He pressed play. Vivian's voice filled the room, clinical, detached, discussing me like inventory to be liquidated. The memory care facility in Westbrook has availability next month. Once she's placed, the house sale can proceed. Preston's already found a buyer willing to close quickly. The trick is keeping her confused enough that she doesn't. Douglas stopped the recording. I watched my daughter's face as she heard herself. Watched the color drain, the jaw slacken, the eyes lose their calculating sharpness. That was the moment I stopped seeing Vivian as my daughter. In her place sat a stranger who'd borrowed my child's face and used it to plan my destruction. Wire fraud, Douglas said quietly. Bank fraud. Elder abuse under federal statute. Criminal conspiracy across state lines. He placed one final document on the table, a letter bearing the Department of Justice seal. The federal agents parked 2 blocks away have reviewed everything. They're waiting for a signal. You called the feds? Preston's voice cracked. On your own daughter. I met his eyes. I haven't decided yet. That's up to Vivian. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat. The tick of the grandfather clock Richard's father had given us. The distant sound of a car passing on the street. Then the doorbell rang. 2 sharp chimes that echoed through the frozen room like gunshots. Vivian's head snapped toward the door like a trapped animal finally seeing the cage walls close. Preston half rose from the sofa before Douglas's hand pressed him back down. They'll wait 60 seconds, Douglas said. Standard protocol before entering without invitation. The warrant's already signed. Vivian turned to me. Really looked at me past the mother she'd dismissed, past the victim she'd created, past all the calculations and schemes. For the first time in 3 years, I saw something human in her eyes. Mom. Her voice broke on the word, and suddenly she wasn't 43 anymore. She was 6, crying because she'd broken my favorite vase and thought I'd stop loving her. She was 16, begging me to understand why she'd lied about where she'd been. She was the little girl who'd held my hand at Richard's funeral and promised she'd always take care of me. Please. My phone sat heavy in my pocket. One text to the agents outside. Proceed. Or delete the message and let Douglas negotiate something quieter. Prison or mercy. Justice or family. The doorbell rang again. 45 seconds now. My thumb found the screen. I pressed send. The text flew into the night blank, silent and final as a judge's gavel. No words needed. The agents had their signal. Vivian's whispered plea still hung in the air between us, but my thumb had already made its choice. 42 years of motherhood ended with the soft whoosh of a departing message. 8 seconds. That's how long it took for my text to destroy everything I'd built with my daughter. I counted every one. The front door opened without a knock. No dramatic crash, no shouted announcements, just the quiet efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. 2 figures in dark suits entered first, followed by a younger man in a Savannah police uniform. The lead agent was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, her pressed charcoal suit and calm demeanor suggesting she'd dismantled financial criminals far more sophisticated than anyone in this room. Agent Rachel Caldwell, I'd learned later, had spent 15 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. She moved like someone who'd seen every variety of human desperation and remained professionally unimpressed by all of it. Behind her, Officer Marcus Jennings provided local jurisdictional support for a young man whose hand rested nervously on his belt as he followed the good. Federal agents inside. His presence made everything real in a way the suits couldn't. This was happening in Savannah, in my living room. To my family, Vivian launched herself off the sofa. Officers, thank God you're here. My mother is having a complete breakdown. She's been making wild accusations. She attacked us with fabricated documents. Agent Caldwell walked past her without a glance. Walked past me. Walked past Douglas, who stepped aside with the quiet satisfaction of a chess player watching checkmate unfold. She stopped directly in front of Preston Mercer. Her voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone reading a prepared script. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. Please stand and place your hands where I can see them. Vivian's performance collapsed mid-sentence. Preston, what? No, you don't understand. She's the one who, her finger swung toward me, but no one was watching her anymore. I'd spent weeks wondering how this moment would feel. Vindication, grief, triumph instead. I felt hollow, like I was watching someone else's family disintegrate through a pane of thick glass. Preston rose slowly, his face cycling through emotions I catalogued with architectural precision. Shock, calculation, decision. The same sequence I'd watched in Vivian when she'd walked into my ambush. Apparently, they'd learned from the same playbook. Agent Caldwell began the Miranda recitation. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be. I want to cooperate fully. Preston's voice cut through her measured words. He didn't wait for her to finish. I wanted on record that I had no knowledge the power of attorney was revoked. Vivian handled all the legal documentation. The room went silent. This was her operation from the beginning. Preston's finger rose, pointing directly at my daughter. She told me her mother signed everything willingly. I trusted my wife. Check the signatures. They're not in my handwriting. The account transfers. The property documents. The psychiatric evaluations. I never touched any of it. I watched my daughter watch her husband throw her under a federal bus without hesitation, without apology, without even the courtesy of eye contact. He threw her like luggage he'd been waiting to discard at the first checkpoint. Vivian's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Preston? Her voice came out small, confused. The voice of a child who'd just learned that Santa Claus wasn't real. Preston, what are you doing? He didn't answer. He was already talking to Agent Caldwell about cooperation agreements. about testimony he could provide, about evidence on Vivian's personal computer that would substantiate his claims. The words poured out of him in a torrent of self-preservation that had clearly been rehearsed. I realized, watching him, that Preston had always known this day might come. He'd prepared for it, built escape routes into every document, every transaction, every forged signature. My daughter had married a man who'd been planning his exit strategy since their wedding day. Vivian's face went through shock, then denial, then something I'd never seen before. The kind of devastation that rewrites a person's entire history. Every anniversary dinner, every whispered plan, every moment she'd believed they were partners in this scheme. All of it recontextualized in the space of 30 seconds. She turned slowly toward me. The accusations I'd expected never came. The pleas, the denials, the desperate performances, all silent now. What came out instead was something worse, something quieter. You knew. Vivian's voice was barely audible. You knew he would do this. I held her gaze. I didn't flinch. I didn't lie. Yes, I said. I did. That's why I'd sent the text. Not to punish my daughter, not for revenge, but because I'd spent 2 months studying the man she'd married. And I'd recognized what she couldn't see through 15 years of willful blindness. Preston Mercer loved money more than anything, including the woman who'd helped him try to steal mine. Vivian stared at her husband as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw my daughter clearly. Vivian recovered faster than I expected. The survival instinct of a cornered animal overrode her devastation in seconds. One moment she was staring at Preston's retreating back as Officer Jennings escorted him toward the door. The next, she'd pivoted toward Agent Caldwell with the desperate energy of someone who just found one last card to play. This woman has dementia. Vivian's voice had found its professional polish again, though cracks showed at the edges. My mother has been declining for months. This man, she jabbed a finger at Douglas, is exploiting a vulnerable elderly woman. None of this so-called evidence is legitimate. She doesn't know what she's signing, what she's agreeing to. Agent Caldwell's expression didn't change, but I noticed her pen pause over her notepad. Douglas moved before I could respond. He'd prepared for this, of course he had. Richard had always said Douglas anticipated objections the way chess masters anticipated moves. He withdrew a tablet from his briefcase and swiped through to a video file. Agent Caldwell, this footage was captured this morning. His voice carried the measured calm of a man presenting Exhibit A in a trial he'd already won. By the very surveillance cameras, Mr. Mercer installed throughout this house. Time-stamped, unedited, chain of custody, documented. He pressed play. The tablet screen glowed between us like a window into an alternate reality. There I was, that same morning, standing in my kitchen, cracking eggs into a bowl, humming an old show tune Richard and I had danced to at our wedding. The camera angle was unflattering, mounted high in the corner. Clear meant to capture evidence of confusion, but what it showed was the opposite. I watched myself chat with the mail carrier through the window, discuss property taxes with clarity, joke about the weather. The woman on that screen wasn't confused. She wasn't declining. She was sharp, present, and completely aware of the world around her. Ma'am, Agent Caldwell turned to Vivian. The woman in this video appears fully competent. Your dementia claim is not supported by the evidence your own husband collected. Vivian's face went through a transformation I'd seen only once before when she was 16 and I'd found the acceptance letter to the art school she'd hidden because Preston's family thought architecture was more respectable. That same trapped desperation, that same realization that the lie had become unsustainable. The footage could be old, she tried. He could have edited the timestamp. The metadata is verified. Douglas didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. And we have 3 neighbors prepared to testify they spoke with Mrs. Ashford this week. All will confirm her complete mental competence. I reached into my pocket and withdrew my phone. The recording app was still open, had been running since I'd first suspected what my daughter was doing to me. Douglas had suggested the precaution. I'd hoped I'd never need to use it. There's more, I said quietly. Agent Caldwell took the phone I offered. She pressed play. Vivian's voice filled the room. Hearing it recorded was different from remembering it. Colder, Clinical. The voice of someone dissecting a problem, not discussing her mother. The key is making her doubt her own memory. Once she starts questioning herself out loud, we have audio proof. Move her keys every few days. Cancel appointments she made and tell her she forgot. The trick is consistency. Small things repeated. Preston's voice responded, tinny through the speaker. And the medication. Just enough to make her foggy. Nothing dangerous. We're not monsters. We just need documentation. The recording continued. Every strategy, every planned manipulation, every cold calculation about how to convince doctors, lawyers, and eventually judges that I couldn't manage my own affairs. My daughter's voice, explaining how to dismantle my independence piece by piece. Agent Caldwell's expression had hardened into something professional and final. Mrs. Mercer, this recording establishes premeditation and criminal intent. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say, that's not. Vivian's voice cracked. I didn't mean it like that. We were just talking. We never actually... You did, I said. The canceled appointments, my keys appearing in strange places, the sedatives you dissolved in my evening tea. I held her gaze. I switched cups 3 months ago, Vivian. I've been drinking yours ever since. How many nights had she lain in bed with Preston, planning each manipulation? How many Sunday dinners had she sat across from me, cataloging my supposed weaknesses while I passed her the gravy boat? How many times had she kissed my cheek goodbye while calculating her next move? The recording ended. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Vivian sank onto the couch. Not dramatically, not performing, just collapsing like a building with its foundation removed. All the angles and strategies and desperate pivots drained out of her, leaving behind someone I almost recognized. My daughter, 43 years old. The girl who'd brought home wounded birds. The teenager who'd cried when her first boyfriend betrayed her. The woman who'd held my hand at Richard's funeral and sworn she'd always protect me. Mom. Her voice carried nothing but defeat. No manipulation, no angles. Just the raw question she should have asked months ago. Why didn't you just confront me? Why did you let it go this far? Why didn't I just confront her? The question hung between us as Agent Caldwell secured the second handcuff around Preston's wrist. The click echoed through my living room, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times in crime dramas. But nothing prepares you for that metallic finality in your own home. Because I tried, I said quietly. 3 months ago, you told me I was paranoid. Vivian's face crumpled. But I didn't have time for her tears. Agent Caldwell was guiding Preston toward the foyer, and my son-in-law was walking past his wife without a single backward glance. 15 years of marriage, a daughter, a life built together, and he moved past her like she was furniture he'd already forgotten. Preston, Vivian's voice cracked. Preston, look at me. He didn't turn, didn't slow. The front door opened and closed behind him with the same quiet efficiency as everything else tonight. No drama, no farewell. Just a man discarding his accomplice now that she'd become a liability. Douglas stepped forward, a legal envelope in his hand. Vivian. His voice carried none of the warmth you'd always shown her at holiday dinners. You need to see these. She took the envelope with trembling fingers. I watched her face as she read, watched the devastation deepen with each document. Emergency custody order. Douglas explained, though she was already staring at the words. Lily will remain with Vernon and Constance Crane pending the investigation. Given the nature of the charges, the court determined immediate removal was necessary. My daughter. Vivian's voice came out strangled. You can't take my daughter from me. The order also details the account freezes. Douglas continued as if she hadn't spoken. All joint accounts. All individual accounts in your name, including the $400,000 you transferred to First National last month. $400,000. My daughter had hidden $400,000 while telling me she was helping manage my finances, while sitting across from me at Sunday dinners, discussing my declining memory, while kissing my cheek and promising to take care of everything. The betrayal had layers I was still discovering, each one more elaborate than the last. That money was, Vivian started. Stolen, I finished, from accounts you told me you were protecting. Agent Caldwell touched my elbow. Mrs. Ashford, We'll be in contact about formal statements. Mr. Mercer has the schedule." She nodded toward Douglas, then followed her partner out the door. The house felt emptier with each person who left, fuller with everything that remained unsaid. Vivian stood in the center of the living room, legal papers clutched against her chest, staring at the door her husband had walked through without looking back. I saw the moment it hit her, really hit her. Not the arrest, not the evidence. The realization that Preston had been planning his escape route since the beginning, and she'd never been anything but a tool he'd use and discard. Her knees buckled. She went down slowly, catching herself on the edge of the coffee table before sliding to the oak floor. The same oak floor I'd refinished myself in 1992, 8 months pregnant with her, working on my hands and knees for 3 weekends straight because Richard said we couldn't afford professionals and I was too stubborn to wait. Now my daughter knelt on that same wood, reaching for the mother she'd tried to erase. "Mommy." The word came out broken, childlike, nothing like the clinical voice on those recordings. "Please, he made me do it." Preston said we needed the money, said you'd never notice, said it would all work out. Her hands found my ankles, gripped them through my stockings. "I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me." Tears streamed down her face, mascara tracking black lines through foundation that had cost more than my first month's rent in 1975. "Remember when I was little? When I used to help you measure the rooms at your job sites? You called me your little architect. Remember?" I remembered. God help me, I remembered everything. 7-year-old Vivian in Richard's hard hat, holding the measuring tape with such serious concentration. 12-year-old Vivian staying up late to help me with blueprints when I was overwhelmed. 20-year-old Vivian standing beside me at the opening of my biggest project, pride radiating from her face. I looked down at her, my daughter, my firstborn, the baby I'd sworn to protect from everything. I hadn't protected her from this, from Preston, from whatever broke inside her that made this scheme seem acceptable. From the voice that could discuss liquidating her mother's life with such cold efficiency. "I remember," I said. "That's why this hurts so much." Her hands tightened on my ankles. Her tears soaked through my stockings. She wielded childhood memories like weapons, and part of me wanted to surrender, to pretend, to gather her up and tell her everything would be fine, the way I had when she was small and the world had wounded her. Then I saw Richard's photograph on the mantel, his eyes watching us, his smile frozen at 63, a year before the diagnosis that would kill him. She'd started planning this while he was dying. "Get up! Vivian!" My voice came out steady, final. "Get up! We need to talk about what happens next." I stepped back, and her fingers slipped from my ankles like a child losing grip on a balloon string. Vivian looked up at me from the oak floor, mascara streaked, desperate, still reaching. But I was done reaching back. "Get up," I repeated. My voice didn't waver. I wouldn't let it. She rose slowly, using the coffee table for support. Her designer dress wrinkled and stained with tears. For a moment we stood facing each other, mother and daughter, architect and demolition. And I searched her face for the child I'd raised. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, wearing familiar features. You know what I learned in 40 years of architecture? I didn't wait for her answer. A building stands or falls based on one thing, the honesty of its foundation. You can have beautiful facades, impressive height, all the decorative elements money can buy. But if the foundation is compromised, everything comes down. Vivian's lips parted. "Mom, You built your life on lies." I continued as if she hadn't spoken, on taking what wasn't yours, on treating people, treating me like materials to be used and discarded when you were done. Preston did the same to you, and you're shocked, but you taught him the technique. The words landed like a demolition notice. I watched them hit, watched her flinch, watched the last flicker of hope drain from her eyes. 40 years of blueprints. 40 years of knowing that what you build only matters if you build it on truth. My daughter had constructed a castle on quicksand. Elaborate, expensive, impressive from a distance. And now she was sinking. I couldn't throw her a rope without being pulled down too. I can't be your foundation anymore, I said. You'll have to find your own footing now, or fall. Please, Vivian's voice cracked on the word. I'll do anything. Community service, therapy, whatever you want. Just don't leave me like this. Like what alone? I gestured at the empty room. You made sure I'd be alone in a memory care facility while you spent my money. You planned it while your father was dying. Vivian, while I was holding his hand and watching him fade. You were calculating how to erase me. She had no answer for that. There was no answer. Movement near the hallway. Wallace Thornton stepped into view, his kind face grave with concern. He'd been waiting in the kitchen, giving me space to say what needed saying. Now he moved to my side, his hand finding mine with the quiet certainty of someone who understood that sometimes you need an anchor. Lorraine, his voice was gentle. Douglas has the car ready. Wallace's hand felt steady and warm against my cold fingers. I didn't deserve comfort. Didn't feel I'd earned it. I was abandoning my daughter, walking out on 43 years of motherhood. But I held on anyway, because I needed something solid when everything else was crumbling. Douglas appeared from the study, evidence folders tucked under his arm, the same manila folder that had started all this, now joined by documents that would determine Vivian's future. His expression held no triumph, only the weary satisfaction of a man who'd done his job. The police will want a statement tomorrow, he said to me. I've arranged for them to come to Wallace's place. You shouldn't stay here tonight. I nodded. The house I'd loved for 35 years had become a crime scene. The rooms wed raised my daughter, celebrated anniversaries, mourned my husband. All of it tainted now by what had been planned within these walls. We walked toward the front door. Behind us, Vivian's sobs escalated. Mom, please. Her voice followed us across the hardwood. Don't leave me here alone. Please. Mommy, please. Mommy. She hadn't called me that in 30 years. I paused at the threshold, my hand on the doorframe. Wallace didn't rush me, didn't pull me forward. He simply waited, understanding that this moment required witnessing. You don't have to look back, he said quietly. Yes, I do. I turned. One last time, so I remember what I'm walking away from. I looked at my daughter, not the predator who'd tried to steal my mind, not the schemer who'd planned my institutionalization, but the baby I'd held 43 years ago. The girl who'd wanted to be an architect like Mommy. The teenager who'd cried when I told her buildings were just frozen music. And she'd said she wanted to compose symphonies in steel and glass. That girl was still in there, somewhere, buried under Preston's influence. Under greed. Under whatever fear had convinced her that stealing from her mother was acceptable. But I couldn't excavate her. Only she could do that work. Goodbye, Vivian, I said. I stepped through the door. The evening air hit my face, cool and clean after the suffocating heat of confrontation. Doug Galaxies was already at the car. Wallace guided me down the porch steps I'd climbed 10,000 times. Behind us, the door closed with a sound like a casket lid. Through the wood, I could hear Vivian screaming, "Mommy, please! Mommy!" The word echoing after me as I walked into the night. Wallace's hand tightened on mine. The house I'd loved for 35 years held a daughter I'd have to learn to live without. November light looked different through law office windows, colder, sharper, the light of consequences finally arriving. 1 month had passed since I'd walked away from my daughter's screams. 1 month of sleepless nights, of Wallace's patient presence, of learning to live with the hollow space where my family used to be. Douglas's office smelled of leather and old paper. The kind of room where fortunes changed hands and lives were dismantled in triplicate. He sat across the mahogany desk from me, a stack of documents between us, like a wall built from everything my daughter had done. The federal sentencing came through yesterday. Douglas opened the first folder. Preston received 9 years, plus restitution of $3.2 million, every cent he helped steal, plus penalties and interest. 9 years. My son-in-law would spend 9 years in federal prison. He'd be 55 when he walked out, assuming good behavior. I waited to feel satisfaction, triumph, something. It never came. The property sales have been voided, Douglas continued. All funds recovered to your accounts. The lake house, the downtown parcels. Everything is back in your name, exactly as it was before. And Vivian. Douglas's expression shifted slightly. Her cooperation bought her probation. 3 years supervised, mandatory therapy, community service. He paused. She's selling the Atlanta house to cover her legal fees. The court awarded her supervised visits with Lily only 2 hours twice a month with a social worker present. 2 hours. My daughter had tried to steal my mind, my money, my freedom. Now she could see her own child for 2 hours twice a month while a stranger watched. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt like a building after demolition. Empty, gutted, waiting for whatever comes next. The psychiatrist who signed those evaluations, I asked. Douglas's jaw tightened. Dr. Whitmore had his license revoked last week. He's facing criminal charges of his own fraud, conspiracy, filing false medical documents. He withdrew another document. Turns out Preston paid him $40,000 for those assessments, cash, untraceable, until we found the safety deposit box. $40,000 to declare me incompetent. That was the price tag on my sanity, less than a new luxury car, more than most people's annual savings. A man I'd never met had signed papers claiming my mind was failing, and he'd done it for the cost of a kitchen renovation. There were other victims, Douglas added quietly. 3 other elderly patients whose families had similar arrangements with Whitmore. Your case broke the pattern wide open. I absorbed this. 3 other families. 3 other mothers or fathers who might have lost everything the way I almost did. Something shifted in my chest. Not quite comfort, but something adjacent to purpose. The recovery is complete, Douglas said, closing the final folder. Your assets are fully restored. Your name is cleared. The restraining order against both Preston and Vivian is in effect. He looked up at me with the expression of a man ready to conclude business. I believe that covers everything. Was this what justice felt like? This hollow space where anger used to live. I'd expected triumph, or at least peace. My daughter was humiliated, my son-in-law imprisoned, my assets restored. The architectural integrity of my life had been rebuilt. Every stolen brick returned to its proper place. But buildings aren't just bricks. They're the people who live in them, the memories that fill their rooms, the laughter that echoes off their walls. My building was structurally sound again. It was also very, very empty. There's one more thing, I said. Douglas had been reaching for his coffee. His hand paused midair. I need you to draft a new document. His expression shifted as I spoke. He'd expected me to sign the final papers. Shake hands. Go home to Wallace and the quiet life I was rebuilding. He didn't expect me to have one more request. What kind of document? His voice carried the careful neutrality of a lawyer who'd learned that client surprises were rarely simple. A conditional guardianship arrangement. I met his eyes. For Lily. Douglas set down his pen. Lily is with Vernon and Constance. The custody arrangement is stable. I know, but they're in their 70s. Preston's parents won't be able to care for a teenager forever. I chose my next words carefully, the way I'd once chosen load-bearing materials. I want there to be a path forward. For Lily, and possibly, I paused, for Vivian, if she proves herself capable. Douglas stared at me for a long moment. Downtown traffic hummed through the windows, somewhere down the hall. A phone rang and was answered. You're offering forgiveness. No. The word came out firm, final. Forgiveness isn't something I can give right now. Maybe not ever. I leaned forward slightly. But I'm an architect, Douglas. I build things. And I'm offering a blueprint, a set of conditions, a structure she can work within. What Vivian builds with it is entirely up to her. He picked up his pen slowly, pulled a fresh legal pad toward him. Tell me, he said, what conditions you have in mind. Outside the window. November light continued its cold illumination, but somewhere in my chest, something that had been frozen for a month began very slowly to thaw. The pen felt heavier than any blueprint pencil I'd ever held, because this signature couldn't be erased. Douglas had spent 3 days drafting the documents I'd requested. The conditional guardianship was complete, filed, ready for whenever Vivian proved herself worthy. But this document was different. This one was permanent. The irrevocable trust, Douglas said, sliding the final page toward me. All remaining assets transferred to Lily's name, managed by appointed trustees until she turns 25. I stared at the signature line. One stroke of ink would lock my life savings. The property holdings, the investment accounts, everything Richard and I had built together into a structure my daughter could never touch. The exclusion clause is permanent. Douglas continued, Vivian cannot challenge this trust under any circumstances, not through courts, not through inheritance claims, not through any legal mechanism I can imagine. And the conditional guardianship path we discussed, completely separate from the trust. His voice softened slightly. She can potentially earn back relationship with you and Lily, but never the money. The money goes to your granddaughter. Perpetual exclusion. The words sounded like a prison sentence because they were a prison built of legal language, designed to protect Lily from the mother who might someday try to steal from her, too. I'd watched Vivian target me. I wouldn't let her do the same to my granddaughter. I signed my name. The ink flowed across the paper, permanent and irrevocable, exactly as intended. Douglas collected the document with the careful reverence of a man handling dynamite. I'll file this today. It's done. Lorraine. Whatever happens next, Lily is protected. I nodded, but I didn't feel relief. I felt like I'd just finished demolishing a building I'd spent a lifetime constructing. The rubble was cleared now. What remained was empty space, waiting for something new. The next morning, I drove to Bonaventure Cemetery before dawn. Mist rose through the Spanish moss as I walked the familiar path to Richard's grave. I'd been coming here every month since we buried him. But this visit felt different, heavier, like I needed to confess to the only person who might understand what I'd done. I'd brought 2 thermoses of Earl Grey, our morning ritual, continued beyond death. The ceramic cup I kept on his headstone was exactly where I'd left it last month, slightly weathered but still intact. I filled it carefully, then poured my own. I signed the papers yesterday, I said aloud. The cemetery was empty this early. I could speak without feeling foolish. Everything goes to Lily now. Vivian can't touch it. Not ever. The granite didn't respond. Richard's name stared back at me.
Carved in stone that would outlast us all.
The mist made everything soft. The Spanish moss, the monuments, the grief I'd been carrying since he died. Here, in this quiet place, I could finally admit what I'd been avoiding. I didn't know if I'd been a good mother. I didn't know if the things we'd taught Vivian, ambition, excellence, the importance of building something lasting, had somehow warped into the greed that nearly destroyed me. We built such beautiful things. Richard. My voice caught. Houses, careers, a reputation, a daughter. But somewhere along the way, we forgot to check the foundation. I sipped my tea. It was already cooling in the November air. Did we do this? Did we teach her that things matter more than people? The question had haunted me for weeks. She watched us work 80-hour weeks, celebrate completed projects, measure success in square footage and profit margins. Maybe she learned exactly what we taught her. The moss swayed gently overhead. A bird called somewhere in the distance. Lily will know the truth, I continued. When she's old enough, I'll tell her everything about you, about her mother, about all of it. She deserves to understand where she comes from, even the ugly parts. I placed my hand on the cold granite, my wedding ring clicking against his name carved in stone. I'm not sure I did the right thing, Richard, but I did the only thing I could live with. What would you have done? The question hung in the morning air, but I knew the answer. He'd have done exactly what I did. He'd have protected the granddaughter and mourned the daughter. That's what we architects do. We save the structures that can still stand. Behind me, footsteps crunched on gravel. I turned, expecting a groundskeeper or another early mourner. Instead, I saw a small figure standing at the cemetery gate, silhouetted against Vernon's idling car. 12 years old, brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing the same uncertain expression I remembered from her mother at that age. Lily. She stood frozen at the entrance, as if asking permission to enter this private grief. Vernon remained in the car, giving us space. He must have known I'd be here. I'd mentioned the visits to Constance last week. My granddaughter took one hesitant step forward, then another. "Grammy!" Her voice carried across the quiet cemetery, small but determined. Can I talk to Grandpa too?" I looked at her, this child caught between parents who'd failed her and grandparents trying to pick up the pieces. She didn't deserve any of this. None of us did. I held out my hand. "Come here, sweetheart. I'll pour you some tea." That morning at the cemetery became the first of many conversations. Lily and I talked to Richard together, sharing tea from my thermos while the mist lifted around us. Vernon waited patiently in the car, understanding that some healing happens only between generations who share the same grief. The following weekend, she came to the house. She ran like only children can, full speed, arms wide, no thought of falling, straight across the November lawn toward me. I stood beneath the ancient oak where Richard and I had hung her first swing, where Vivian had played as a girl, where 4 generations of memory lived in the roots and branches. Lily hit me at full force, arms wrapping around my waist, face buried against my sweater. I held her while Vernon and Constance made their way more slowly across the garden, giving us this moment. "Grammy," her voice was muffled against my cardigan, "is the big tree still okay?" I looked up at the oak, 200 years old, branches bare against the gray November sky, trunk scarred from storms that predated everyone I'd ever known. "See those roots?" I knelt to her level, pointing at where the massive base disappeared into the earth. 200 years of holding on. This tree has survived hurricanes, droughts, lightning strikes, and everything in between. Lily studied the trunk with the serious expression I remembered from Vivian at that age. "I dreamed it fell down," she said quietly. "Last week, I dreamed everything fell down." Nightmares. Of course she was having nightmares. Her father arrested, her mother in disgrace, her entire life uprooted and replanted with grandparents she barely knew. She was processing trauma the only way a 12-year-old could, through symbols she could understand. 200 years of storms. 200 years of roots digging deeper while branches reached higher. This tree knew something about survival that I was only now learning. "Trees like this," I said, running my hand along the rough bark, "they grow stronger from storms. The wind makes them push their roots deeper. The damage makes them grow around the wounds." I met her eyes. "You're going to be like this tree. Lily, what happened won't break you. It will make your roots stronger." She considered this with the gravity of someone much older. "Like you, Grammy. You held on too." I pulled her close again, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. Vernon and Constance reached us, and we settled onto the garden benches beneath the oak's bare canopy. I'd brought out my grandmother's tea service, the delicate china with the faded rose pattern that had traveled from England to Georgia. In 1892, my mother had used this set. I'd used it with Vivian. It should have been Vivian's to pass down. There should have been 4 women at this table. My grandmother, my mother, Vivian, Lily. A chain of daughters stretching back through time. Instead, there were 2 of us, with Vernon and Constance filling the empty spaces they never expected to occupy. "This tea set belonged to my grandmother," I said, lifting the pot carefully. "Her mother brought it from England when she was a young bride." Lily watched me pour with wide eyes. "It's so old. Older than this house, older than that tree even." I handed her a cup, watching her small hands cradle it with instinctive reverence. Some things survive because people decide they're worth protecting. Will it be mine someday? The question hung in the November air. Vernon and Constance exchanged glances, but said nothing. This was between grandmother and granddaughter. "When you're ready to understand what it means," I said slowly, "yes, it will be yours." I watched Lily pour refills with the careful concentration of a surgeon, her small hands steady. Her tongue caught between her teeth as she measured the angle of the pot. This is what survived, I realized. This is what mattered. Not the house, not the money, not the schemes or the betrayals. This. A child learning rituals that connected her to people she'd never meet. Constance accepted her cup with a grateful nod. Vernon wrapped his weathered hands around the warm china and stared at the oak tree as if it held answers to questions he couldn't ask. Lily set down the teapot and reached into her jacket pocket. "Grammy, I brought something. She pulled out a photograph, creased, worn soft at the edges, clearly handled many times over the past weeks. She unfolded it carefully and held it out to me. Vivian, 7 years old, standing under this exact oak tree, wearing Richard's oversized hard hat, grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile I'd forgotten she ever had. The photograph must have been taken the summer we renovated the kitchen. I could see the construction debris in the background. "Grandpa Vernon gave it to me," Lily said quietly. He said Mom wasn't always the way she is now." I stared at the image of my daughter, the little girl who'd wanted to be an architect like Mommy, the child who'd believed the world was fair and people were good and love was enough. Lily looked up at me, her eyes carrying questions too heavy for any child. "What happened to her?" "Grammy." I looked at the photograph in Lily's hands, 7-year-old Vivian grinning under Richard's hard hat, and found the only honest answer I could give. "Sometimes people get lost," I said quietly. "They start wanting things more than they want to be good. Your mother got lost, but she's trying to find her way back." Lily nodded slowly, absorbing this the way children absorb difficult truths incompletely, but enough to start. A month later, she asked me a different question. "Grammy, why doesn't the house fall down?" Lily stood in my living room, head tilted back, students the ceiling beams with the same intensity Vivian had shown 35 years ago. "It's so big and heavy." The question hit me like a time capsule. December light slanted through the windows, catching dust motes in the air. I remembered 7-year-old Vivian asking the exact same thing, standing in this exact spot, wearing that same curious expression back then. I'd given her the technical answer: load-bearing walls, distributed weight, engineering principles, and mathematical precision. I'd been so proud of her interest, so eager to share my professional knowledge. This time, I chose differently. "Because the foundation is honest," I said. "The people who built this house didn't take shortcuts. They did the hard work that no one would ever see, the part underground, the part hidden by walls and floors. They knew that what you build on top only matters if what's underneath is true." Lily considered this with that gravity she'd developed over the past months. "So the hidden part is the most important, always." I gave Vivian the technical answer when she was 7. Load-bearing walls, distributed weight, engineering principles. I gave Lily the human answer. Maybe that's where I went wrong the first time. Maybe I taught my daughter how to build without teaching her why honesty mattered more than impressive height. "Grammy," Lily's voice pulled me back. "Can you teach me? I want to build things that last too." My throat tightened. "Yes, sweetheart. I'll teach you everything I know." That evening, Wallace brought 2 coffees to the garden and sat beside me on the bench beneath the oak. We didn't speak for a long while. We'd learned that comfortable silences could hold more than most conversations. The December sunset painted the bare branches in shades of amber and rose, somewhere in the house. Lily was practicing her fractions with Constance. Vernon had gone to check on something at the car. For this moment, it was just the 2 of us and the ancient tree. "How old is this oak?" Wallace asked finally. 200 years, maybe more. I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee cup. "Planted by someone who knew they'd never sit in its shade." Wallace nodded slowly. "That's faith, Lorraine, building something you won't live to see finished." His hand covered mine on the bench, warm where mine was cold, steady where mine still sometimes trembled. Wallace's hand was different from Richard's had been. Not better or worse, just different. I wasn't replacing anything. I was adding to what I'd already built. I didn't pull away. "I'm going to build a cottage," I said, "in the garden, for Lily's weekend visits." Wallace smiled. "You're going back to work." "I'm going back to building. There's a difference." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house settled into its familiar silence, I spread fresh paper across Richard's old drafting table. The graphite pencil felt familiar in my hand, a tool I'd used 10,000 times. Designing spaces where people would live and work and grow. Foundation 18 inches, poured concrete, nothing fancy, nothing that could crack under pressure. Walls simple frame, cedar siding that would weather to silver over the years. Windows facing east for morning light. Facing the oak for afternoon shade. The blueprint unfurled beneath my pencil. And for the first time in months, I felt like myself. Not a victim, not a victor, not a mother who'd lost her daughter. Just an architect, doing what architects do, imagining something that doesn't exist yet and making it real. I sketched a small porch where Lily could sit with her own tea service someday, a window seat where she could read, a drafting table smaller than Richard's, sized for a girl who wanted to learn how things stand. Not for me, for her, for whatever she becomes. Through the study window, I could see the oak tree silhouetted against the night sky. 200 years of storms had bent its branches, but never broken its trunk. It would be standing long after I was gone, shading whatever Lily built in its presence. On the desk beside me lay the photograph of 7-year-old Vivian. I hadn't put it away. I wouldn't. She was still my daughter, even now. The conditional guardianship documents waited in Douglas's office. The path back existed, if she ever chose to walk it. Some foundations crack, some foundations hold. Mine had held. I signed my name in the corner of the blueprint, Lorraine Ashford, A.I.A., and set down the pencil. Outside, the December night was cold and clear. Inside, the house stood solid around me, built on foundations that had never lied. And ahead of me, a cottage that didn't exist yet, waiting to be built for a granddaughter who wanted to learn how things last. And to you listening to my story, remember this: the people closest to you are not always who they seem to be. Looking back at everything I went through with my daughter, I made one critical mistake. I trusted too easily. I saw the warning signs, the missing keys, the canceled appointments, the strange questions about my finances, and I explained them all away. I wanted so desperately to believe my own child would never hurt me. Don't make my mistake. Trust, but verify. Always. What I learned is this: protecting yourself is not the same as being cold. It is wisdom. It is survival. When someone shows you who they really are, even if that someone is your own flesh and blood, believe them. I believe God carried me through those dark months for a reason. Not to punish my daughter, but to teach me that my worth was never tied to her approval. My foundation held because I finally chose to stand on truth instead of false hope. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to protect yourself from someone you loved? Share your story in the comments. Your words might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who might need this message, and subscribe so we can continue this journey together. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your presence here means more than you know. As a reminder, some details in this story have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is purely coincidental. The heart of the message is what I hope you